Norway, 1940. Calabria, 1940. Mediterranean, 1940 to 43. Libya, 1940. Matapan, 1941. Sufax, 1941. Greece, 1941. Crete, 1941. Malta convoys, 1941. Sicily, 1943. Salerno, 1943. Arctic, 1944. Norway, 1944. Burma, 1944 to 45. Those are the battle honours of HMS Nubian. Those battle honours are equalled by two other vessels officially: HMS Orion, a Leander-class light cruiser, and HMS Jervis, a J-class destroyer, and are only exceeded by HMS Warspite, which of course had served in World War I. The only vessel to achieve more battle honours in her lifetime served in 2 world wars. And it's actually kind of interesting when you go through battle honours and you're looking at destroyers, because what qualifies as a battle honour for a destroyer is very different than necessarily what qualifies as a battle honour for a capital ship. Because let's be honest, it's fairly easy when you've got 2 battleships chugging it out against each other and going boom boom. It's a battle, so it tends to equate to a battle honour. When you have destroyers engaging each other, it's different. It's very different. Sometimes you get an immediate awarding of honours. Sometimes it's recognised straight away. Sometimes it's never recognised. Sometimes it takes years and it's retroactively rewarded. Nubian suffered a bit from this, but in a class which was as decorated as the tribal class destroyers were, and as honoured as the tribal class destroyers were, coming first amongst the honours is quite a feat. Let's be honest, she beat HMS Eskimo for battle honours. Eskimo, who considers her bows an expendable shield. She beat HMS Tartar, which fought her way through World War II the hard way, definitely. She beat HMS Asante, who, thanks to a very special shield and bell, managed to get through the war fairly easily in terms of damage received in comparison to other vessels, but honestly doesn't take any less risks and doesn't do anything less in terms of fighting. HMS Nubian. A vessel I freely admit that when I wrote the section in my book about her, and I'm not reading it out today because it still causes issues, I spent, when I wrote up her summary at the end of the book, just putting it in, I spent a long time thinking, yeah, that was a waste of a ship. Scrapping Nubian, the way she ends, it's just, it's not right. It's not right at all. But the point is, she served. And she served well throughout World War II. Modified and upgraded on many occasions. She was critical. She was absolutely critical. HMS Clarke. Genesis of a modern destroyer, and it starts off with vessels like Nubian. They were critical to it. G-36. Like most of the Royal Navy's Tribal class destroyers, she goes through several different letters through World War II. She starts off as L-36, then becomes F-36, and transitions through G-36 at one point. It's just fun. She's always 36, but sometimes her letter changes. Displacing 1,921 tons in standard. Yes, I know, the limit was supposed to be 1,850. She was 71 tons over. 2,559 tons in deep. Overall length of 114.9 meters. Beam of 11.13 meters. And draft of 3.343 meters. Power came from 3 Admiralty free drum boilers, supplying 2 shafts via 2 geared steam turbines with 44,000 shaft horsepower. Design top speed 36 knots. Real top speed, well, that you'll have to take up with tribal captains. But I will tell you this. They never had trouble keeping up with the battle cruisers when they went full pelt, and they always kept up with their carriers when they went full pelt. Range 5,700 nautical miles at 15 knots. Complement 190. As built, they are built with ASDIC but built for radar, which is one reason why they are the quickest and easiest class that is upgraded to radar of the Royal Navy destroyers. They are first class built for radar. They have the systems put in place to provide power. One of the interesting things is that they are built with sort of the early versions and are good for radar, but then of course radar becomes self-rotating, powered rotation, so it's a constant rotation. That becomes more of an interesting thing once they get used to that, but they do manage to work it out. And one of the interesting things with radar is they turn around and go, hang on, don't we already have this system with beacons? Yes. So we're trying to develop a separate system for radar, and we could probably just adapt the system we use for beacons. Yes, but we're different departments. Look, there are many who sometimes, well, I wouldn't say many, but there are a few who seem to think I always say the Royal Navy gets things right. They don't. They don't always get it right. And sometimes it takes them a while longer to get things right than others. But they have one massive advantage in the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s and the 1910s. Things like Thornycroft. Masses and masses of depth to the maritime industry and infrastructure, which means they usually have someone they can call upon who's already working on it, so they can get a leg up. Because usually the different companies competing for contracts are already doing their own basic research. No, it won't be a finished product, but it's like things with a 15-inch gun. One of the discussions I got into recently with someone was that the Royal Navy developing their 15-inch gun, they picked a version which they hadn't tested, which was unthought of at the time. Only been tested by the maker. Which was, the Royal Navy hadn't done that with a gun. It was considered a complete leap in faith. Yet, if you consider the German response for 15-inch gun, they have to go for a gun which has only been talked about as a theory. It's a paper gun. Why? Because the Royal Navy has about a dozen companies it can call on who are all trying to make guns, not just for the UK market, but to sell them to other people abroad. That's the same with turbine industries. It's the same with all the other things that they've got going on. They have all sorts of competitions and depth of industry. Whereas the major buyer of large naval guns from Germany is Germany. Which means you constantly have that navy asking for money to buy these things, and that navy gets the money as long as that's not asking for so much money that the army isn't getting the money it needs. Because that's the order of priority. Because Germany is, because of their land borders and their extensive land borders, primarily concerned with how strong is our army, because we have actual borders of people. The Royal Navy, as a maritime empire and an island nation, has the advantage of going, well, look, our borders with nation and with everyone else is that bluey green liquidy stuff off the land, outside the land. So we need funding. It helps. Now, where does this come in with destroyers? Well, with the destroyers, specifically the tribals, it comes in the fuse-keeping clock. You see, the Admiralty had been looking at various fire control systems, and they did want to put in their own fire control clock, but they knew that the high-angle control system wasn't necessarily the sensible thing to go for a destroyer. It was too heavy. So they had a talk with the various people who were working on things also at the time. And one of the options was someone was trying to make their own version of the high-angle control system, which was for destroyers. And they'd been working on this since about the early 1930s. So when the Royal Navy in 1935 goes shopping, they have a system which is already halfway there to what they want to go from. They don't have to develop from scratch. They have a system already halfway there. This is even with the treaty limitations and the British government having been going around paying for rationalisation of the shipyards. Yeah. Neville Chamberlain. Right idea, wrong time. Every single time. I'm conceding he got the right ideas. Now, this brings us to this HMS Nubian. She's a Tribal-class destroyer. She's a destroyer because she's got torpedoes. Only 4, theoretically. Yeah, well, a single quadruple mount, and supposedly only carries 4, but as I said in my video about HMCS Hyder, and when we visited her, it was kind of interesting that there are points on deck which are known as torpedo tie-down points. And when I was discussing it with the crews, I said, well, we never did this, but most of us served in sort of times when you didn't need a lot of torpedoes, but it wouldn't be impossible. Which would explain why in certain events she seems to fire 6 or so torpedoes. It would, considering the power of the torpedo and it's their primary weapon for dealing with ships larger than them, and considering things like at the Battle of Cape Matapan, what are the tribals doing? What are they involved in? They are the link between the scout group and the main fleet. They're out on their own. They are what's keeping visual communications, silent communications, therefore, between the forward-ranging cruisers and the carriers and the capital ships. HMS Formidable, Warspite, Valiant, Barham. This is what's keeping that link going at Matapan. And HMS Nubian is critical in this battle. She is absolutely, along with her sister Mohawk, the centerpiece of it. Because if you have to start using radio communications to coordinate between the groups, you reveal the presence of all the groups, which immediately tells the Italians where you are. And you have to be careful about what ships you risk. If you need to put a cruiser there, because that's capable of, the only thing capable of independently defending yourself, then you have to shorten the A to K line, which is the scout line. Now, you can of course put the tribals in the A to K line. That's what they had been designed for, to be part of. But they are still lower than a cruiser. They are still not as physically as high. So, if you're doing a visual search, they're probably less useful in that role than the cruiser will be. But sitting between the groups, providing that communications link, that's good. And they actually position themselves in such a way so that they can communicate with both ends of the A to K line. So instead of it having to be a flash communication going across the A to K line and then coming down, it could actually go from all points of the A to K line back to Cunningham. That's an important thing when you're doing this kind of battle. Matapan is an ambush. It's sadly an ambush which got sprung by a cruiser rather than the capital ship they were hoping for. Let's be honest, they were hoping it would be Vittorio Veneto, which got smashed by a torpedo. They were hoping that it was that which would be stopped and slowed down, not the Polar. But 3 heavy cruisers. I suppose if you were really talking about what Cunningham was hoping for in a night action, you probably have to argue that he was hoping for about a capital ship, 6 heavy cruisers, 4 or so light cruisers, and half a dozen or so of destroyers. All would be quite nice. But he didn't get that. He was cruising with enough force to do that, but he didn't get enough. Didn't get that. He got a damaged cruiser, which called back 2 more cruisers to assist it, and he got to ambush all 3 of them. And he got to do that largely because Admiral Iacchino had no idea where he was. And he had no idea where he was because HMS Nubian and HMS Mohawk, her sister, were making sure the communications were done in a way which couldn't be picked up. That matters. She has a long history through the war. Fighting in Crete, she's damaged. She's bombed and has her stern blown off. Loss of 7 of her crew killed, 12 wounded. She does this because she gets between the carrier and the strike. And the strike decides it's better to try and engage the destroyer who's in their way than go for the carrier. She does the tribal class destroyer's role. Get between the threat and the Royal Navy. She does it well. Despite losing her rudder and much of her stern, she's able to proceed to Alexandria under escort, but not under tow. steering using her shafts, so alternating power on the propellers. She then went to Undertow for more extensive repairs in Bombay, and because it would be a lot faster than her steering using her propellers across the Indian Ocean, and took 18 months to be completed. She returned to the Mediterranean and the 14th Destroyer Flotilla in November 1942. She had been damaged on the 26th of May 1941. She immediately went into action against the Lupo convoy on the 2nd of December, and off Tripoli, again with HMS Jervis. If you remember from the beginning, the vessel which shares the record with Nubian. On the 20th and 21st of December, into action again. Let's carry on. Let's do a bit more about her. I'm not finishing there. In 1943, she of course took part in the landings in Sicily and Salerno. Returned to Britain, took assignment to the Arctic, doing convoy duty, and sunk probably at least one submarine in a cat and mouse hunt with a very experienced submarine U-boat commander, which apparently lasted 2 to 3 days. There is debate as to whether you take the time from when Nubian started engaging the U-boat or when the U-boat spotted the convoy. But Nubian sunk her. She also tracked at least 11 other U-boats, and that twice attacked the convoy she was shadowing and supporting, and assisted in the sinking of possibly another 6. There's debates about whether or not. As is always, it's a claim that a U-boat was sunk, but it's matching up the sinkings with the loss of U-boats and being quite sure, well, was that lost in that fight, or was that damaged and limped home, or is that a full sinking, or did that vessel actually get sunk by them, or did it just get sunk because, I don't know, the toilet flush went wrong? There are all sorts of issues with being exactly sure with U-boat sinkings. She then spent a lot of time helping out with operations off Norway, including the strike on the German submarine base at Trondheim Fjord and the attack on Tirpitz in Altenfjord. She was basically on-call preferred escort for carriers and other ships on critical missions. At the end of 1944, she's refitted and is dispatched to the Far East in March 1945 as part of the 21st Aircraft Carrier Squadron. She's assisting and protecting them, operating off Burma. Now, the 21st Aircraft Carrier Squadron was, of course, at this point, was composed of vessels like HMS Royalist, HMS Phoebe. Phoebe, I don't think. Actually, Phoebe was replaced at that point. But you had HMS Amir, HMS Emperor, HMS Empress, and Khedive escort carriers, and HMS Shah, which were all being used to provide support for troops operating in Burma. On-call air support. Quicker, easier than building airfields to keep pace with the advance of the troops. Have the escort carriers provide that support, much as they had at Salerno. Difference was here, they're able to move around a lot more. There's a lot more space for them to move around. But they always have escorts. They usually have either HMS Nubian or HMS Tartar with them. HMS Verdun, HMS Penn, i.e. VMP and a couple of tribals and a Dido-class cruiser, usually acting as flagship. This was considered Well, not at the safest duty, because still occasionally Japanese cruisers like to wander into the Indian Ocean. But there was a reason they were using escort carriers for it rather than fleet carriers. They were often the British Pacific Fleet. And this is actually where quite a lot of tribal class destroyers ended up. In fact, all four pretty much of the British ones ended up at various points at the end of World War II in the Indian Ocean. Why? Because you were sending cruisers and you were sending your other principal units off to the Far East to fight in the British Pacific Fleet. But you needed the Indian Ocean Fleet and forces to be strong enough just in case the Japanese decided to come in and cause trouble. You didn't want to hand them an easy win or an issue like, had it happened. Various points. So the Japanese were very good at taking advantage of weaknesses. Well, the very simple option, put the tribals there. They were the back pocket cruisers, as I said several times in my book, of the Royal Navy. They're able, if necessary, to look like a cruiser. At a distance, they certainly do. But more importantly, they are able to act like a cruiser in terms of fire support, in terms of fighting, in terms of protecting against enemy destroyers. They are able to do all those things. And should an enemy cruiser turn up, well, they can also provide their torpedoes. And you have a class which have basically had the thing about the tribal class destroyers, and I'm trying to be to the point because I can be very verbose on the subject. They are, from the moment they're conceived and told, they are conceived and created, and the crews are commissioned to them. They are told that we are the elite of the elite. The Royal Navy destroyer crews already consider themselves an elite. They consider themselves a cut above. They are small ships. Everyone has to be able to do pretty much everything aboard versus a battleship or any of the bigger ships where you can have more specialists. Their officers consider themselves an elite because at a very junior level they are in complete command of all sorts of things. So they have to be good. The Royal Navy doesn't like to have people who have to be carried in any way, shape or form getting onto a destroyer. And destroyer crews weed out people who are lazy, less good, very quickly anyway. And then you have the tribals, who are the elite of the elite, because they are told, right then, so our destroyers are going to be the tip of the spear. You have to go in front with that spear and make sure it gets home. You have to be the guide of the spear, the protectors of the spears, the ones who will bat away enemy destroyers, will do anything necessary to strike to the enemy. And that is why at the Battle of Narvik, in the Third Battle of Narvik, HMS Eskimo never hesitates. Straight round at the front of the fjord. Straight round the curve in the fjord. Yes, she takes a torpedo. Yes, she loses her bow. That doesn't matter. What matters is she's providing cover for the other destroyers to come through, because that's her job. Which is why they don't hesitate. There's no demurring. There's no commander, are you crazy? There is, we have got guns at the back, we carry on our turn, and we advance sternwards towards the enemy. We will still provide covering fire for the other destroyers to come round and do their job, because that is what we're for. That is our purpose. That is why HMS Nubian didn't hesitate when there's a strike coming in for the carrier. She gets between the strike and the carrier. That's her job. That's what she does. And you want to have one or two of those with your strike group operating off Burma, because if a Japanese cruiser does do a run on them, yes, that Japanese cruiser will get sunk. But you want a ship there which you guarantee, no matter what, will get between those escort carriers and that enemy cruiser. And the thing is, the other destroyers, the other cruisers, they probably will. Because they probably will do, because that's the Royal Navy spirit. But the tribal class, you can guarantee will do, because from their very beginning, their crews have accepted that as being a core part of their culture. As being something they are expected to do. as something which doesn't make them expendable, but makes them the elite of the elite, because they're trusted to do the most dangerous thing they can. And that's HMS Nubian. She does it the whole way through World War II. Anyway. Half an hour. Well, I'm 10 minutes over. But, yeah. She deserves it. And she's got a whole section in her book. In the book about her. Right. I'm going to finish there because I get very un-British when I have to talk about how she ended. Because it really wasn't done right. She should have been preserved. Thank you very much for watching. I normally finish videos with a question, and I'm going to finish this one with a question. So, Battle of Cape Matapan is an interesting battle. Because, flip a coin, it's Vittorio Veneto which is so damaged, not Pola. How do you think that works out? How do you think that night action goes down? And how do you think that affects the rest of World War II if in 1941 at Matapan the Italians lose Vittorio Veneto? Because let's be honest, there are 3 battleships hunting her down in the middle of the night. And at the ranges they would have got, because Cunningham's adopting the very the very core of British night fighting doctrine. British night fighting doctrine is not like Japanese doctrine, which is to fire a lot of torpedoes at you at night and basically wear you down and trick you in that way. No, British night fighting doctrine is for destroyers, cruisers, and capital ships to approach you through the dark with their guns pointed towards you, and to hold their fire till the moment you start to react. So they get very, very close. This is the reason why the Italian cruisers are wiped out. They basically don't get to fire back. Nothing helps them, because they are just so close. That's what the Royal Navy have been practicing for 20 years by this point. The idea that in night fighting, you get as close as you physically can before you start firing. So, what do you think happens? Thank you for watching, and take care.